Hi, I'm Time Itself. In this video, we're going to take a close look at how Hipfire works in Call of Duty and Battlefield, how the basic mechanics are very similar, but differences in the engines and game design give each series its own flavor. Then we'll get into shotguns. The random spread of the buckshot has the same mechanics as Hipfire, and again, the two series make for some interesting comparisons of how developers represent shotguns in-game. Hipfire is an important aspect of both games. While it's not advisable to spray and pray, sometimes it's the best option, typically when getting surprised by a close-quarters gunfight when waiting to aim is a luxury, and Hipfire will keep you more mobile and thus make you a harder target to hit. One difference I found surprising is that Battlefield reticules imply a much larger spread than the weapon actually has, whereas Call of Duty places the inner edge of the reticle at the outer edge of the spread. Hipfire has the same directional recoil that aiming down sights has. You often don't notice it because the random spread of the Hipfire causes a lot more inaccuracy than the recoil, but the size of the spread does increase when firing faster than the gun can recover. The size of the spread typically varies with weapon, attachments, and potentially other soldier customizations like perks, but that isn't all. Stance and movement typically play a role too. Both series engines give designers a lot of options and many go unused. In general, spread goes down when going from standing to crouching, and sometimes when going from crouching to prone. But it's here that we start to see more differences in design between the games. I'd say this is a result of Battlefield's more weighty character movement compared to the legacy of the Quake 3 Arena engine with its faster movements. In Battlefield 3 and 4, spread is primarily a function of stance and how fast you move. There are transitions between the stances, including sprinting, vaulting, and jumping, but in most cases the game has maximum and minimum value for spread, and what spread you have is just a linear interpolation of how fast you're moving compared to your base movement speed. COD has maximum and minimum values too, but in Call of Duty even modest amounts of movement will result in maximum spread, but it doesn't happen quite instantly. It seems like the movement is working against the spread reduction directly. In practical terms, this means that COD players will typically have the maximum spread. Now, what kind of random distribution is spread? I'd asked this before when doing my shotgun probability series for Call of Duty, and found an even spread over area to appear reasonable for my other assumption of an ideally aimed shot. If I graphed that, it would look something like this. One of the difficulties in that series was that I couldn't just fire a bunch of shots at a wall and see where the pellets landed. The fact that all the impact decals were 50 caliber meant I didn't get enough precision to actually do anything useful with it. Ghosts made a change, however, and shotgun pellets are now small enough that I can do a useful wall test. The same kind that John Stuart Mill did over at Sythic.com, showing how in Battlefield the spread is described as uniformly or evenly distributed as a distance from the center. Of the 57 pellets I fired in this test, I could identify 56. 25 of those are within half the total spread of the center. My former assumption would have predicted that only about 14 pellets would have been in this area. I wasn't quite the 28 I expected, but after a few more tests, I'm going to say that this is the best guess we have for now about how Call of Duty works too. What's the big difference? In short, half the pellets show up in the middle quarter area of the circle, a quarter of the pellets in the middle 16th, and so on. If I plot the new probability density, it looks something like this. I've cut off the asymptote at the origin. It doesn't actually flatten out there. What does this tell us? Hipfire might be spray and pray, but you can really help your odds the closer you can stay to your target. I said I'd done some stuff with this before, so let me talk about that for just a minute. When I was doing the shotgun probability series and starting to estimate the probability of a single pellet of an ideal shot hitting an enemy, I started with just an image and counting pixels, and then plotted an estimated probability given the radius of the spread. The blue line is uniform spread from the center, the green is uniform over the area. Quite the difference, but the red shows the results of the hundreds of tests at each data point I did, and then the estimate I finally used. The hitboxes aren't exactly where the pixels are, and there's a fair bit of estimation going on when I'm measuring, so I'm kinda happy with how close it was to start with. That still leaves the question, should the results of shotgun probability be thrown out because the uniform area distribution played a part in making the hit probability estimation? While I would tweak the formula if I were to do it again now, it's not going to result in big changes. Close range is too much of a mess to do much more than just fit to the data, but once all of the character model is inside the spread, the last 3 data points, that should have specific relationship to each other. You can see the discontinuity on the graph if you look closely where the equations switch over. That this fit the uniform area so well is why I'd gone with it. Anyway, the results would be slightly lower at the beginning of that range and slightly higher towards the end tail. Yes, it could be better, but it's still a useful tool for coming up with a reasonable estimate for hit probability. Battlefield tends to have longer ranged combat, so it's not surprising that on average spreads are lower. Take bolt-action rifles for example. In Ghost, they have a standing minimum spread of 16 degrees. In Battlefield 4, most bolt-action rifles have a spread of 5 for standing still. Infinity Ward clearly is trying to shut down the no-scopers, but DICE is okay with giving aggressive recons a slightly more viable, cheeky option. Assault rifles standing min-max in Ghosts, 3 to 7. Battlefield 4, 3 to 3.5. Submachine guns Ghosts, 3 to 5, and Battlefield PDWs 1 to 1.5. But those numbers mean slightly different things. In COD, the max value is the max value, but for Battlefield, the larger number is just the base value before the weapon recoil starts adding onto it. Again, in COD, players are usually going to have the maximum spread value you can see. In Battlefield, it just starts somewhere and keeps going up. Steady aim or laser sights serve the same purpose, reducing the spread when hip firing. In COD, it's 65%, and in Battlefield, it's 75%, except for when standing and moving, which it's also 65%. Given what we know about the random distribution, we can say that this is like moving the outer 35 or 25% of the shots back over the remaining area, or increasing the density about 54% for COD, or ranging down to 33% in Battlefield. But of course, that's only useful if you can hit your target with the increased accuracy. So let me take my Hipfire probability curve fit and compare how much of that 65% reduction in spread improves the odds given a well-aimed shot. It's usually around a 10 to 25 percentage point increase. Let's talk about shotguns. I find it very interesting how different developers represent shotguns and fit them within their game's balance. COD takes a close enough approach, get within range, and your aim only has to be close enough. Battlefield prefers to keep a lot of focus on precision. The result is that I like running and gunning with shotguns in COD, but in Battlefield I prefer a defensive or stealthy approach, situations where I'm less likely to miss that all-important first shot. There are some interesting differences between Call of Duty and Battlefield with how spread can change with stance, movement, and aiming down sights, even with shotguns. So let's take a quick look back through the COD series. In COD 4, shotgun hip spread is the same for all stances, with fairly typical series spreads of 4 degrees for the more accurate pump and 5 for the semi-auto. But when you aim down sights, the spread goes up to 5.5 degrees. You're more accurate from the hip. Since steady aim or the laser sight affect the pellet spread directly in Call of Duty, this becomes a common situation and is counter to one of the main ideas of the modern military shooter that you should be more accurate when aiming down sights. If you wanted long-range effectiveness with the tighter spread of steady aim, you made your life more difficult in close quarters. Black Ops 1 started to change this, first by varying hip spread size with stance and movement, but also by giving a less than maximum value for spread while ADS. The SPAS 12 standing spread is 5 to 8, but ADS is 5.5, ensuring that a non-steady aim user aiming down sights wouldn't be at a ridiculous disadvantage compared to a hip-firing steady aim user, unless they were standing perfectly still. Black Ops 2 took this idea to the extreme. Shotgun spread dropped to 2 degrees while ADS. The 870 had a max spread of 10 and put out 400 damage point blank, making it a one-shot monster in bad breath range. But the ability to tighten the spread gave it a frightening chance at range as the pellet damage started to drop off. A fun, flexible, and dangerous weapon. In Ghosts, stance and movement don't affect spread, though it appears shooting can. But ADS will tighten the spread so that it's as low or lower than using steady aim. Not the 2 degrees Black Ops 2 had, but still a fairly tight spread. From a gameplay perspective, these iterations have led to a nice balance of flexibility between close-range power for one-shot kills without needing pinpoint accuracy, but needing to keep shotguns from being either too easy or ineffective at more than 10 feet. But it's unrealistic as hell to have the choke of your shotgun always changing, so Battlefield has its own way of doing things. Battlefield separates the random pellet spread and randomly pointing the shotgun slightly in the wrong direction. The pellets will be centered around the random point where the gun was aimed. It makes sense having the actions of the soldier and the gun work independently. It does mean that Battlefield shotguns won't have the kind of flexibility we see with those in Black Ops and Ghosts. It can be hard to tell that the soldier's inaccuracy is important with the open choke guns, without sprinting and jumping to maximize the inaccuracy. But Battlefield 4 has introduced choke modifiers that let us easily see the system at work. Here is a Hawk with a full choke, which decreases the weapon spread, but increases the soldiers while hip firing. The pellets have tight groupings, but usually not at the center of aim. We'll cover the different choke options in more detail in another video. Well, I hope you found this video interesting and informative, and hopefully something useful. I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.